with a little information about them, and they all got a front page little biographical sketch where they were, what they were doing, and so we had drawers full of these old zinc cuts, we called them, of pictures of service people, and there were a lot of them, you know. So they were, and we had a lot of newspapers being sent to the service people overseas. So I think the paper really did serve as to boost the morale, you know, and that's what it was supposed to do. And personally, I suppose I graduated from high school in '43, in the spring of '43. But I stuck around, worked in the print shop then for, about 8 months or so, I guess, before I was drafted. And then I went into the service and was gone till the end of the war.
Okay. Do you remember the day Franklin Roosevelt died?
Oh, yeah.
What do you remember about that?
Well, I remember that I was a patient in a hospital, an army hospital in England.
Oh, okay.
I'd been wounded, and I was in a hospital in England, and I remember that coming over the radio. And very, very plainly. And I also remember, I think it was shortly before that Ernie Pyle. You ever heard of Ernie Pyle?
Mm-mm.
Well, he was supposed to be the greatest war correspondent of World War II. And he was shot by a Japanese sniper just a few days, I think it was, before Roosevelt died.
Okay.
He had been in Europe, but then he went to the Pacific and he was shot, killed. And those two things really stood out. I mean, I really remember those so plain happening while I was in the hospital.
How long were you in the hospital for?
3 months in England and 3 months in America, United States.
Okay. So I guess moving into your childhood experience, so what was your childhood like?
Great. I had a good childhood. We always had a good neighborhood, a lot of, always had friends, and I don't know, it's just, I can't think of any bad things that ever happened when I was a kid, except one. I fell into a ditch that had been dug for a water pipe, and I was on a tricycle with another kid, and I fell in there, and down about 6 foot, and my uncle pulled me out, but that's the only bad thing I really remember.
Okay. Did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up? Did you always know you're going to be in print, or?
Well, I suppose I took a lot of things for granted. I knew what my parents wanted me to do, and I was the obedient son, I guess. They always thought, well, I should carry on the business. I should be a printer and an editor and all that. So that's the way it turned out.
Okay. Did you have a role model when you were growing up?
Oh, besides my dad?
Maybe your dad.
I had quite a few role models. In business or in the newspaper, my dad would be one of them. And I had an uncle that worked for my dad, and he was more like a big brother, and he taught me a lot, about printing and what have you. And I had a role model in high school, one of the teachers. He was a coach and later principal. Mike Jones was his name. And, as a young kid, you might say, I had a high respect for him, and I may never said it, but I'm sure I thought, gee, I'd like to be like Mike. He knew how to handle people and treated everybody so well and had their respect. And I can remember some other people along the way. One pastor in particular was quite a role model, and an old scoutmaster. So I had a lot of role models. I had a lot of people that contributed, toward my well-being, you might say.
Okay. So when did you join the army? I guess.
Well, I went in June
Okay.
of 1944.
Were you? You were probably asked why did you join? Just because
Well, I was
you
drafted.
were drafted into it. Okay.
I got one of those letters from the president. It says, greetings. You have been selected. So that's how you went into service.
How did you feel about that?
Oh, I was ready to go. Because most of my high school friends had gone in just a little bit before I did. And I didn't want to hang around any longer. So it was a big adventure,
Okay.
You don't contemplate what some of the consequences might be when you're that age, 18 years old. You think you're invincible.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember the first day you arrived in Europe?
Oh yeah, very well.
Can you describe that at all?
Well, we got off a troop ship in Naples Harbor, Italy. It was either Christmas Eve or the day before Christmas Eve. I'm not quite sure, but I always kind of thought it was Christmas Eve.
Okay.
And I remember getting on the baggage detail and helping load up trucks and stuff to haul our luggage, our bags. And I remember it was cold and wet and miserable. And we got in this truck, and some Italian drove the truck through a mountain pass, and I thought for sure we were going to go over the cliff, but we didn't. We went up to a replacement depot. That was a place where the replacement troops would be housed while they were assigned to a combat unit. Well, we sat there for 3 weeks. Then they put us back on the ship and took us to Marseille, France.
Okay.
So we got off the ship again, and then after a week and a half or so, we were finally assigned, after traveling on a 40 and 8 train, we were finally assigned to I was assigned to the 14th Armored Division, to an infantry unit.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when things got hairy after that.
Did you want to talk about that a little bit, or?
Oh, well, my career as a combat soldier was rather limited as compared to some guys. Of course, compared to some others, it wasn't. But after, we had a period of time of training and reassembling and getting ready, and then we went, and finally getting up to the front and being under fire, and then a little later, then we made the big attack or push into Germany, and then that's when I was wounded. So March 23rd, 1945 was the end of my active military career.
Okay. Were you shot and were you shot then?
Yeah.
Okay.
uh, by artillery
Okay.
in the legs.
Okay. Then that's when you went to the hospital
Yeah.
that you're talking about?
And they flew us to England.
Okay. Were you like scared at that point?
Was they what?
Scared?
Well, it's hard to explain one's emotions.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it was still too dumb and young and dumb to be real frightened. Yeah. Apparently, I had enough faith to think I was going to make out all right, which I did. So we better get on with newspapering.
Okay, well, I guess I have a little bit more about that, I guess. Well, you received the Purple Heart and the Bronze Star.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, if you shed a little blood, you get a Purple Heart.
Okay.
And if you serve in the infantry and get a combat infantryman's badge, well, that kind of qualifies you for a Bronze Star. And if you were at a certain place at a certain time and did certain things on French soil, why then almost 70 years later, and then I got the French Legion of Honor. But it took 70 years.
That's a long time.
Yeah. They will not give those posthumously. So they waited till most of them were dead. Then they didn't have to give so many away.
So what was it like receiving those awards then? Did you...
Oh, I don't know. I suppose this last one was a little more ceremonial or gratifying than Purple Heart. They'd laying in the hospital and they just come in and pin it on you
Okay.
and shake your hand, and that was it.
Oh.
And then that Bronze Star, I got that years later, and there was no pomp and ceremony at all. But I do remember getting a good conduct medal. Now there's something. And they told me, you go in a certain office and Captain so-and-so is going to give you this good conduct medal. So I went in there. I guess I was so, by that time, having been in the hospital quite a long time, I was so unmilitary that I didn't even salute him. And he didn't care. So,
Really?
no.
Okay, so I guess were you able to keep up with the news then while you were in France?
Oh, yeah, very much. Say, I might inject something here. I don't know if it'd be of any interest.
Go ahead.
When we went overseas on the troop ship, they asked for volunteers to work on the ship's newsletter.
Oh, cool.
Every day they'd get out a little mimeographed paper. And my job was to help type it up, you know. You know how mimeograph works?
No.
Well, you type this, I don't know what they called it, kind of a plate that anyway you put in the typewriter, and then it picks up ink in this
Okay.
mimeograph machine. Well, anyway, I volunteered. I thought it's better than being down this old stuffy hole. And so, I don't know, we were on water 17 days. And I think we got out at least a dozen papers during that time. And I do remember in rough weather sitting by the desk and trying to type, and the chair was going back, rolling on the floor, you know, and you had to hold on the desk.
Hard.
I think they had the desk anchored down. And so anyway, we got this little paper out. I can't remember what we called it. But that was kind of a fun project. And the ship's chaplain was in charge.
Oh, okay.
So he didn't use any bad language paper.
How many people worked with that then?
Oh, I guess there were, I don't know, 3, 4.
Okay.
So, and they'd, you know, it would contain little tidbits about what was going on in the ship. And then it would also get news off the radio. the ship's radio,
Okay.
and they reprint that in there, kind of keep up with the news that way.
Yeah.
So I just thought I'd mention that because
Yeah.
one of my great journalism accomplishments.
So, did going to war affect you as a journalist then?
Oh, I think so. I think going to war affects you most every way. Yeah. Yeah, it has to, I think.
Okay. So you wrote a book called A Wartime Odyssey, right?
Yeah,
Um.
that was just about my experiences in the hospital.
Oh, okay. So what? So that pretty much inspired you. Did that being in the hospital inspired you to write that then?
Yeah, years and years later.
Okay. How many years later was that?
Oh, man. I didn't write that till about 10 years ago.
Oh, okay. Okay. So I guess it's been a while then.
And since then, I have a grandson. He's a school teacher. He's a pretty good writer. And now he got a hold of my journals, and he's using them to create a book.
Oh, is he? Okay.
So someday when I get that done, I'll send a copy up to you in school or something,
Sounds good.
if you want it.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. So was it difficult to write your book, or
I know, it seemed like it took an awful long time.
how long did it take?
I don't know. Months, I guess.
Okay.
I just can't remember.
What do you hope people take away from reading it?
Oh, that freedom isn't free,
Okay.
but that there's, even in the worst of times, there's some good things, and there's some humor, and there's lessons to be learned, and life to be lived.
Okay. So I guess we can move into your journalism career now. And so you started working at the print shop when you were 12.
Yeah.
Do you remember any jobs for the newspaper when you were younger
Oh,
to get involved with until you were 12?
well, in the old letterpress days, one of the big tasks in newspapers, what they called to throw the paper in
What did you do with that?
after it was printed. Then you had to disassemble these forms, and you had to throw the linotype slugs and stuff away to be remelted. The handset type you had to put in the cases back where it belonged, and the spacing material had to be put in certain places to be used again the next week.
Okay.
And in the process of doing that, your hands just got black. I never had clean hands for years, I think. But there's an old joke about the old printer that was at the end of after the paper was out, instead of putting the type back in the drawers where it belonged, he'd dump it in the barrel. And then you have to dig through to find the letter he wanted. And the salesman says to him, "Boy," he says, "that sure looks like a slow way of setting type." "Yeah, it is," he says, "but boy, I sure make good time on Thursday when I throw it in."
Oh, yeah. That's funny. Okay, so I guess, can you tell me anything else about working for your father's paper when you were young?
Well, we did a lot of printing.
Okay.
Printed for carnival companies and fireworks companies. So we'd work on a newspaper Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday night.
Okay.
Starting Thursday morning, it was printing. Thursday, Friday, and Saturday.
Okay.
And those little printing presses were running.
Did you enjoy that printing part better or the newspaper part?
Oh, I suppose as a kid, probably the printing part, but after you get a little older, after I, was actually operating the business, I appreciated sitting down. My legs weren't too good anyway, so I appreciated sitting down and writing and whatever else I could do.
Okay. Would you say you enjoyed working with your family when you were younger? Like,
most of the time.
yeah, most of it. Did you ever get into like any arguments with your like mom or your dad or?
Oh, I wouldn't call them arguments. I suppose we had a few disagreements about policy, but nothing real major. I guess there was a time when I thought I'd kind of like to just go off by myself and go in newspaper business someplace else, but one seems to be controlled by circumstances, so quite a bit. So that's how it turns out.
Okay. So when you were a high school senior, you took Wednesdays off from school to help out with the paper, right?
Yeah.
So how did the school let you do that?
Oh, I was good friends with the superintendent,
Oh, okay.
and he was a good friend of my dad, and my dad probably just told him, well, I just got to have some help here, because he'd already lost a couple of people, the war, and so I know must have arranged my curriculum some way so that I didn't have to go to classes on Wednesday afternoon.
Oh, so you didn't like fall behind
The
or
lesson.
anything?
No, I was always behind.
Okay. So what was the media environment like during this time?
Oh, I thought we covered that. Didn't we? Yeah, we talked
Oh
about
yeah.
Yeah, pretty.
What about I guess technology then? Like
Oh, technology. Well,
yeah.
the most complicated or most technological piece of equipment was the old linotype, and it drove everybody crazy. In fact, the guy that invented it went crazy. But anyway, that was the one thing that was pretty technical. And of course, then you had your old flatbed printing press to print the papers on 4 pages at a time. Then you flip the paper over, print the other 4 pages. Then it would go through an attached folder, and you have a 8-page folio. And later on, when we printed 12 pages a week, why then you had to stuff the 4-page section into the 8-page section. And a lot of handwork. Yeah, a lot of assembling and a lot more manual labor. I think one thing I'm sure these older printers will remember, those page forms of a page of a newspaper, depending on how big a page, but most of them were pretty nearly the same size. Those would weigh over 100 pounds apiece, the form. And you have to pick that up and carry it over to the bed of the press and put it down. I couldn't do it now. I couldn't even budge it. But even little skinny me had to do that then. I didn't think anything of it. And you had to tote a lot of paper, big old bundles of paper and stuff. So there was a lot of manual labor. And then every week you had to smelt down that lead that went back in the linotype. And you'd pour pigs. A pig was a long piece of lead that you'd form that would be fed into the linotype. And so when you smelted down that lead, a lot of heat, a lot of hot lead that you might get burned on, and a lot of stuff to lift, and it was messy. You had to wear big gloves so you didn't get burned. So now all you little girls, you sit by a computer and you never get your hands dirty, and I'm jealous. Yeah, well, I'm glad it's behind us, but it was quite an experience.
So I guess during that time, as a journalist, was it more difficult? Would you say, or what was it like? I guess.
Oh, I don't know if I say it was more difficult. In the weekly newspaper business, in most cases, the editor or publisher had to know something about printing. He had to do the printing as well as writing and assembling, but in that sense, it was probably more difficult. As far as dealing with people, I don't know if that would have been any more difficult. It might have been at that time. There was an awful lot of competitiveness among local merchants, and you had to kind of placate all of them. You didn't dare show any preference or partiality,
Yeah.
or you might. I'm not going to advertise in your paper anymore.
Oh wow.
So that was one of the things that a local or a small town editor had to put up with.
Okay. Do you have any like favorite memories from working here?
Well, I think my favorite memories are